and call, hey, Kuala Lumpur, what's happening with 370? Oh, he's a bit delayed.
Yeah.
So it's not a big deal.
But what happened in the next 2 minutes was a big deal. At 1:21 a.m, Kuala Lumpur Control observed MH370 pass over a transit point on the flight path to Beijing. But less than 10 seconds later, as the aircraft entered unmonitored airspace between Malaysia and Vietnam, it disappeared from civil aviation radar screens. Systems.
What does the transponder do?
It gives you an identity on the radar. And you call them Malaysian 370. The first thing, Roger 370, you're identified. Which means I have you on radar, I have your bleep on radar, your radar is singing, telling me everything I want to know.
But instead, the transponder was off.
The transponder was not transmitting those things.
The Aircraft Addressing and Communication System, or ACARS, which automatically sends data about the plane's mechanical function, had also stopped transmitting.
Right. And so when you turn that off, no signals...
When you deactivate this, right, it will stop sending that 30-minute interval.
And you can do that here?
Yeah, you can do that here, from the cockpit. Yeah.
Whether these vital communication systems were intentionally or unintentionally turned off by the pilot or someone else on the plane is a matter of speculation. But the authorities' response in the aftermath is not. MH370 was now an unidentified blip on sophisticated military radar. It turned sharply to the west, and then Malaysia's Butterworth Air Force Base in Penang tracked it crossing the peninsula. At 2:22 a.m, the aircraft flew out of radar range and effectively vanished. But tragically, none of this was known for days.
I think what happened was actually nobody is looking at the radar contact live.
Zaidi Ahmed was a Malaysian Air Force pilot based at Butterworth, but was sacked recently for speaking out about election irregularities during the 2013 national polls. In between clear, the country is dangerously unprepared for one. The military's excuse for not reacting to the rogue plane on its radar, now believed to have been MH370, was that it posed no threat because it was a commercial aircraft.
A responsible leader will see, hey, wait, we have a changed situation. We have this kind of new threat. So we have to train our people how to handle this kind of threat. But I think so far, not in the Malaysian military haven't done it.
But surely because it was a commercial aircraft and its transponder was turned off, that should have raised suspicions.
Of course, there's a very, very high indication that something is very, very wrong. They have failed, and the Defence Minister will not fail, because he's supposed to ensure that the armed forces, Air Force, Army, Navy are ready 24 hours. 24 kind of thing rarely happen.
So they should have actually scrambled jets?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
The military's excuse for not reacting to the rogue plane on its radar, now believed to have been MH370, was that it posed no threat because it was a commercial aircraft. It would seem Malaysia Airlines operating procedures could also do with an overhaul. According to the government's preliminary report, the airline informed air traffic control a number of times between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. that MH370 was in Cambodian airspace. But this information was wrong. It was based on flight projections rather than actual aircraft positioning. While confusion reigned in the air traffic control centres, MH370 slipped away, flying south, deep into the Indian Ocean.
And how big is that area?
This area
Yeah.
collectively is about 54,000 square kilometres.
Australia is now leading the search for the missing aircraft, and its Transport and Safety Bureau Chief, Martin Dolan, is in charge of facilitating it.
But this is the extent of...
That's the theoretical possibility of where the aircraft could be. Unlikely to be further north than that, further south than that,
yeah.
and unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely to be further away from the arc than that sort of width.
With no debris found, the search location was determined by the analysis of 7 pings automatically sent from the aircraft's still functioning satellite communication system to the British satellite company Inmarsat. The pings indicated the plane flew for another 6 hours after disappearing from radar range and crossed a series of arcs along its flight path.
What we're doing is taking what's essentially communications information and trying to turn it into location information. Not really been tried before, so there was progressive refinement of the techniques that were being used over time.
Those refinements saw the priority search area move 3 times and thousands of kilometres.
All the experts are now largely agreeing this is as refined and as focused as it's going to get. So we are quite confident but not certain that the aircraft is in this high priority area that we're searching.
Costing more than $100 million, with Australia and Malaysia sharing most of the burden, the search of the priority area is expected to be completed in May. But it's attracted sceptics. One of them is Paul Henry Nargeolet, who headed the successful search for the Air France flight that crashed in the Atlantic Ocean in 2009. We spoke to him via Skype.
The big problem with MH370 is they never found any debris. And for me, that's something very important, you know, because all my life I was saying, no debris, no plane. Because of course, the chance it will be in the Indian Ocean, I will say there is a big chance, but it's a big, big area, you know. And Inmarsat, it's a very, very small information. I know the people were probably saying, you know, it's the only data we have. Okay, but if there is no way to cross with another data, maybe it's a waste of time and a waste of money.
With so many questions unanswered and still not a skerrick of concrete evidence as to where the aircraft ended its journey, family members are in limbo.
Psychologically or emotionally, it might make me feel better to think that the plane was in fact just taken somewhere else and everyone has just been released somewhere. That would give me a lot more peace of mind than the Indian Ocean. But you know, there's really no evidence, so there's nothing to say what it could be or what it couldn't be, and I think for now a lot of things remain a possibility.
Grace Sabati Rai Nathan's mother, Anne Daisy, was flying from her home in Kuala Lumpur to Beijing to see Grace's father, who's living and working there. It was a routine commute between the two cities.
I hope every day that she'll just walk home one day, and we still believe that she'll come. We live our lives as if she might just come home anytime. There has been a lot of stuff that hasn't come out. Like, we're not sure how much they did in the early hours. We're not sure exactly what steps they took. Everything they gave us was so brief. How is this helping us? How is this telling us what you've done so far? How is this telling us where this is going or what we can expect?
Aranan Selvaraj is hoping he can get some of the answers the MH370 families are craving. In a groundbreaking case, the Kuala Lumpur-based lawyer is suing Malaysian Airlines for breach of contract in not delivering passengers to their destination, and the Departments of Immigration and Civil Aviation and the Air Force for negligence.
Was the Department of Civil Aviation informed about it? What did they do about it? Why was there only 4 days later, the search went to a totally different place? What happened during these 4 days? If the government or the authorities can come up with exactly what happened, I think people will be able to accept things in a better way.
With the government saying a royal commission is only likely if the black box is found, he believes legal action is the only avenue families have to find the truth.
What happens if the black box is not found? So can't you still have an inquiry? And the longer you take, it's going to be more difficult, you know. Some of the people might not be there, the authorities might not be there, some of the evidence you might not be able to, you know, at that point of time to get it. So things like this, it makes it difficult.
Despite the Malaysian government's seeming reluctance to investigate its own failings in relation to MH370, it's been more than willing to share its conclusions about what caused the aircraft to disappear.
Up until the point at which it left military primary radar coverage, these movements are consistent with deliberate action by someone on the plane.
But 10 months later, without any prior warning to MH370 families, came this very different conclusion.
We officially declare Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 an accident, and that all on board are presumed to have lost their lives.
In Kuala Lumpur, MH370 families called a press conference denouncing the declaration as yet another callous and calculated act by the Malaysian government. Grace felt compelled to speak publicly for the first time.
To the world, it has been almost a year, but to us, we live this agony every day. We are told over and over, in some form, in some way, in some shape or another, that our loved ones are gone. And we expect our government to care a little bit more, at least about our feelings. They say they make these announcements because they want to make our compensation claims easier. But at the same time, a lot of people here have not accepted any advance compensation payments. So whose interest are they really doing it in? We feel like they want closure more than us. They're probably just tired of dealing with it. They're tired of the adverse media attention they've been receiving. Because we're not the ones who have been asking them for this sort of closure, not this sort of forced closure. We've been asking them for proof or evidence that will give us the proper closure.
Aranan Selvaraj wonders if the government has an ulterior motive in calling MH370 an accident. It based its definition of accident on the Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation, which uses the word to refer to a missing aircraft where the official search has been terminated.
They announced this and they said that that's the definition. You know, when everyone was very upset about it, then they said, no, we're still going to continue search. So are they continuing the search or not continuing the search? Or is it officially terminated, but we're still going to continue the search?
The government's reassurance the search will continue was of little comfort to MH370 families. Arriving in Kuala Lumpur for the first time since the plane disappeared, Sia and the 14 other relatives travelling with her are determined their plight will never be forgotten.
We want an explanation. Without any evidence, they declared the missing plane an accident. We don't accept this as the truth.
At Malaysian Airlines headquarters, the families launch a protest. Management and security officials guard the gates to prevent them from entering. They're demanding the recent declaration be retracted and want a meeting with airline executives in front of the media. As families are made to wait in the simmering heat, frustrations boil over. Malaysia Airlines and the government have refused our numerous interview requests over the past 3 months. So this seemed like a good chance to try to engage with airline management.
Right now we are waiting for them to make the decision who are the 3 representatives to represent them to meet the CEO.
They wanted, though, for all the families to meet with you. I mean, they've come all the way from Beijing. Why wouldn't you meet with all of the families?
We will speak you in a bit.
But like the families, we felt stonewalled.
Okay, any other thing that we would like to say, we will send out the official statement.
What about an interview with somebody from Malaysian Airlines, with television?
As I said, today the focus is the meeting between the representatives of the NOKs, the representatives of the family with the company. Let's focus on that first.
1 year on from the tragic disappearance of MH370, time has done little to ease the pain of the families of those on board. With no guarantee the search will continue beyond the priority area, the families may never know the true fate of their loved ones.
Not a day goes by that I go throughout the day without missing my mom or crying or because of this. Just not knowing, so it's been very difficult to just put it aside and say like, time for me to get over this, because what am I putting aside? I don't know what's happened.
And until they get answers and feel that justice is being done, their nightmare is likely to continue.
Xintang is known as the denim capital of the world, but its success has come at a high price. One travels to China to reveal an industry tainted by labor rights abuses. One at this time on Al Jazeera.
The Syrian conflict began as the Arab Spring swept the region, but has spiraled into a bloody civil war with no end in sight. A story often told, but rarely understood. Al Jazeera's comprehensive documentaries, extended news reports, and in-depth digital coverage contextualizes the conflict that shattered the lives of millions. Syria, Broken Nation, throughout March on Al Jazeera.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello there, welcome to the News Hour. I'm Shuli Ghosh, live from Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha. Coming your way in the next 60 minutes, a leading commander in the Nusra Front is killed in a Syrian army attack. A Russian dissident is released from prison after serving a 15-day sentence for promoting a protest rally. The search must go on. Chinese families demand answers nearly 12 months after the disappearance of flight MH370. Plus,
I'm Sonia Gallego in a town just outside of Madrid where the local neighbours have been giving the mainstream politicians a run for their money.
a senior Nusra Front commander has been killed in a Syrian government airstrike. The Syrian state media says Abu Hammam al-Shami was killed in a special army operation in Idlib on Thursday. Al-Shami was a veteran al-Qaeda leader who held the title of General Military Commander for Nusra Front. Osama bin Javed has this report.
This is an Al-Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan 16 years ago, where some of Al-Qaeda's top commanders today were being trained. This man was among them, Abu Hammam al-Shami, a top commander for Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria called the Nusra Front or Jabhat al-Nusra. Hammam al-Shami was killed in a Syrian army attack in Idlib on Thursday. He reportedly fought in Afghanistan with Al-Qaeda in the late 1990s. Al-Shami then traveled to Iraq before the fall of Baghdad in 2003. He was arrested by the Iraqi intelligence services and handed over to the Syrian authorities, who later released him. He then returned to Baghdad and became a military commander of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. In 2005, he traveled to Lebanon. His travels and jail times meant he met every important figure in Al-Qaeda's top command from Afghanistan to Syria. That's where he joined the ranks of Al-Nusra Front in 2012.
He's a senior commander, military commander for Nusra. This is going to be an important blow.
Over the years, Al-Nusra Front took many strategic positions from the Syrian army. Those gains were challenged by more moderate Syrian rebels and later by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The infighting has helped the Syrian government take back control and target the leadership of all rebel groups fighting against it. And a divided international community hasn't helped Syrians seeking regime change.
The regime has gotten stronger in the last several months. It seems to have picked up speed since the United States began to bomb ISIS and Nusra as well. It has taken some of the pressure off. Iran has stepped in a big way. Hezbollah is committed itself even more than it had before. It's quite clear that the regime, with full Iranian backing, is confident. And this is just one more demonstration that it's going to assert itself. And the allies, the United States, this command of the United States, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, are in complete chaos.
And now the Assad government has claimed the death of al-Nusra's leader, as the US-led coalition also continues to target the group. And Syria's conflict gets more complicated every day. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera.
Zaina Hodder's live for us in Beirut. So al-Shami and several other commanders killed. Zaina, what does this mean for Nusra's fight in Syria?
Well, it is one of the most powerful players on the ground. In fact, it is the most powerful rival of the Syrian government. These are senior commanders. This is definitely a blow to the organization, but the timing of the attack is what is important. The organization has been asked, and this is what we understand, asked by many channels, including international channels, to shift course, to disassociate itself from Al-Qaeda. We have to remember the Nusra Front is Syria's Al-Qaeda branch. They want this group to cut its links with Al-Qaeda, become a purely Syrian force. That means the group will be armed, it will be provided with finance, and what we understand is that there are divisions within al-Nusra's leadership, and the men who were killed yesterday, including Abu Hamam al-Shami, are believed to be the hardliners, those who are not interested in cutting any relationship with Al-Qaeda. We have to remember Abu Hamam al-Shami really has a long history with the organization, like you mentioned earlier, fighting in Afghanistan and in Iraq.
Gilani, the leader of Nusra Front, is one who is open to the split. Does this mean that it now could be more likely?
We still do not have confirmation that Golani is open to the split, but we have to remember something. Nusra Front, what it has been up to as of late, just last week it declared all-out war against the US-backed Syrian rebel movement, the Hazm Brigade. That brigade was actually forced to disband. This brigade was receiving weapons from the United States. This brigade was chosen for its training program. That was a clear message from Nusra to the US. We are able to wipe out any organization on the ground. We are the force on the ground. So at the end of the day, what the coalition has been trying to do is create partners on the ground, which it doesn't have. There is no more so-called moderate rebels. At least they're very, very weak. So really, this is going to be a game changer, but we're going to have to wait to see how it plays out on the ground and on the diplomatic levels.
Zaina, thank you. Zaina Hodder in Beirut there. Israeli police say a Palestinian car driver has been shot and injured after his vehicle ploughed into pedestrians in occupied East Jerusalem. 4 of the 5 who were hurt were Israeli border police women. The incident happened outside a police station on the border which divides East and West Jerusalem. Libya's UN-recognised parliament in Tobruk says airstrikes will end for 3 days in an attempt to promote peace talks. Representatives from Libya's rival governments are meeting in Morocco to end the political crisis as powerful militias fight for control of Libya's oil fields. Malbra has more.
They are walking the meeting hall to sit together to talk about a way out of the conflict. This is the go-between. United United Nations representative Bernardino Leon is meeting here with members of the Tripoli-based government, recognized as legitimate by the country's constitutional court.
We came here because there is a crisis in Libya. The others don't want to talk to us, they want chaos to continue. They continue to bomb our cities, but we want this round of talks to succeed.
The UN envoy moves to another room to talk with members of the internationally recognized government of Tobruk. Libya has two governments and two armies. They have been fighting each other for control.
The fact that we are here means we are building trust, which hasn't been the case in the past. All the parties want to solve the problem, implement a ceasefire, form a national unity government, and appoint a new prime minister.
Rival factions in the past brushed aside calls for dialogue, each laying its claim as the legitimate authority in Libya.
So far I can tell you that there is a sense of, if not optimism, at least a sense that it is possible to make a deal. And this is something very important because in the last months this was not the case.
For years, violence has claimed the lives of people and forced many to flee for safety. It has also played into the hands of groups claiming allegiance to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, raising concerns Libya's civil war could destabilize the whole region.
And Hashim joins us live now. So the two parties not actually speaking face to face, but there are talks going on. What's the latest on those?
Basically today could be the most significant in the talks held here in the Moroccan capital Rabat, and the question to both parties will be, are you ready for a national unity government? Now, the biggest obstacle now that the international community has to overcome is the trust deficit, bringing both the internationally recognized government and to sit both that they are the sole legitimacy in Libya, and that the other side is rogue and trying to undermine peace and stability. If they can come to some sort of consensus today, they will be able to talk about a national unity government. We know from our sources that they have been floating some names about who is likely to become prime minister, but at this particular stage this could be a long way to go until they decide whether or not they want to have a national unity government agreed upon here in Rabat.
There does seem to be an air of optimism about these talks, Hashim. The UN envoy to Libya certainly is talking about it in very optimistic terms. And the Tobruk administration has agreed to suspend airstrikes for several days as these talks are going on. I mean, this is a positive sign, isn't it?
It is seen as a step forward by all the parties, by the government based in Tripoli, by the Tobruk government, and also by into both. In the past, we've met in different locations. We were never near deal. This time, what's different is that we are committed to come up with a roadmap for the future of Libya, and that if we have to stay for long days here in Morocco to come up with agreement, we're going to do so. The international community made it clear to the Tripoli delegation and to the Tobruk delegation they're not in favor of any party, and that they will push for a political settlement, and that all the parties have to forget that there's not going to be any military intervention in Libya to help that party or the other. They have to agree, and if they don't agree, they will still be asked to come back again and agree. So there is some sense of optimism prevailing now in the capital, Rabat.
Good to hear, Hashim. Thank you very much indeed for that. Hashim Al-Habra in Rabat in Morocco there. In southern Yemen, President Hadi has put local militias in charge of all government institutions in Aden. The groups known as the Popular Committees are also responsible for security at his palace. Our correspondent Mohammed Val has been to meet some of their field commanders.
These are the men in charge of law and order in southern Yemen. The Popular Committee's militia has been patrolling the city for months. But now they have replaced all regular security personnel.
I think the Popular Committees have become a key factor of security and stability. They were able to defeat terrorists in Abyan more efficiently than entire countries and governments.
On President Hadi's orders, the Popular Committees now guard the presidential compounds, the airports, and all public institutions.
We welcome the committees among us because they're very useful. We had a lot of weaknesses and they helped us tremendously, especially in matters of crime and illegal weapons.
The Popular Committees were created in 2012 by President Hadi, and the purpose was to help fight against Al-Qaeda in the province of Abyan. They are said to have shown efficiency and made some success, and that's why President Hadi relies on them now for his own protection and to keep security in the city of Aden.
We saw the looting and aggression that took place in Sana'a and later on in Abyan and some northern provinces. We can't let the same thing happen in Aden.
But regarding security in the north, the Popular Committee's commanders appear divided. Some are open to the idea of an anti-Houthi offensive.
We limit ourselves to the south. We welcome President Hadi, but we're not ready to go with him to the north to fight the Houthis.
Some say it isn't their fight.
We will mobilize our forces for war once we have a legal fatwa and a military order, as well as an agreement between all tribes and provinces.
Right now, there is no plan to make a military move on the Houthis in Sana'a. And people here say they are concerned the presence of political players from the capital may turn the south into a playground for instability. Al-Qaeda still operates here, and only the committees are here to protect the south. Mohammed Val, Al Jazeera, Aden.
There's more to come here on the Al Jazeera News Hour, including students in Myanmar take aim at the government. We'll tell you why they're so angry. The death of an Argentinian prosecutor continues to put pressure on President Kirchner as his family say he was murdered. And in sport, a week after being cut at the Honda Classic, Rory McIlroy struggles again, this time failing to tame the Blue Monster course in Florida. Richard will have all the details. Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has been released from prison after spending 15 days in custody. He was arrested for promoting a rally where opposition leader Boris Nemtsov was due to speak. Nemtsov was murdered in Moscow last week on the eve of the protest. Navalny has accused the Kremlin of ordering the killing.
I know you will have lots of questions concerning recent tragic events. I've already expressed my opinion on this, and I won't add anything more for now. But I'd like to say that our activity will not change in any way. We will not lessen our efforts, we will not change anything. And in this sense, the act of terror that took place will not achieve its aims. I'm sure that it will not frighten anyone. It's not frightened me, and it has not frightened my comrades.
Rory Challens joins us now live from Moscow. And Rory, if Vladimir Putin thought Navalny being behind bars would keep him quiet, he had another thing coming. Navalny's been very outspoken about Nemtsov's death.
Yeah, essentially what Navalny's position is that Nemtsov was killed by either government intelligence or a pro-government organization on the specific orders of the Kremlin itself, the leadership of the country, as he put it, saying Vladimir Putin's name specifically. Now, Navalny thinks that various groups have been created, like a group that was made at the beginning of the year called Anti-Maidan, for this kind of purpose specifically. So he's very dismissive of the idea that Nemtsov died as a result of a kind of general atmosphere of hatred in the country. He says that's nonsense. This was a specific order.
The Russian opposition, of course, has taken quite a battering recently. Where next for them?
Well, I think clearly people like Navalny will be worried about their own safety. You could argue that Navalny is a much higher profile opposition figure than Nemtsov was. And at the memorial for Nemtsov last weekend, another opposition figure, Ksenia Sobchak, was warned that she has to consider that there's a possibility that she might be next. But the opposition are continuing with what they are trying to do and what they have been doing. So the reports that Nemtsov was working on into the Russian government, the Russian military's involvement in Ukraine, the opposition are saying that that will still be published. We don't know when, but probably sometime soon. And the march that was going to be taking place last weekend as an opposition march, which became the memorial march for Nemtsov, that opposition march is now going to happen in April. But if the opposition are going to make any kind of headway, they're going to have to overcome the kind of prevailing atmosphere in Russia at the moment, which is a very, very strong public mood of conservative nationalism. It's going to be hard.
Rory in Moscow, thanks very much indeed for that. An opposition leader from Tajikistan has been shot dead in Turkey. Umrali Kuvatov was killed by an unknown assailant in Istanbul. The oil businessman led the banned opposition organisation Group 24. He was one of the hardline president's most outspoken critics. Police in South Korea are investigating possible links between a knife attack on the US ambassador and his alleged assailant's multiple visits to North unification on Thursday. A lynch mob in northeastern India has broken into a high-security prison and murdered a rape suspect. The mob dragged the 35-year-old from the prison, paraded him naked and beat him to death. Syed Farid Khan was accused of raping a 20-year-old Naga woman last month. Student leaders in Myanmar are accusing government leaders of trying to curb academic freedom. Protests that were largely peaceful for 2 months have now turned violent. Banu Bhatnagar has more.
Student protesters say this was a heavy-handed crackdown on a peaceful protest. Police say they came under attack after they told demonstrators to disperse.
Security men in plain clothes were doing this to a girl in downtown Yangon. What are they trying to show? Does this brutality belong in this day and age?
Demonstrators are angry at the government for pushing an education bill they feel would stifle academic freedom. They're calling for changes to the school system and the right to form unions. These demonstrations have gone on for months in Letpadan. Authorities say it's the first time they've taken action, despite the fact that activists did not get the proper permissions. Student activists want to march to Myanmar's largest city, Yangon.
We are protesting because we want reform of the education system, which has been neglected for something like 60 years by the government. We've written letters to the parliament, we've had a lot of meetings and submitted a lot of demands, but they don't care much, so we've had to have this march towards Yangon.
They're calling themselves the 88 generation, named after student protests in 1988 that sparked a pro-democracy movement. Myanmar's military suppressed the protests then and intensified its crackdown on activists and writers. But a lot has changed in what was then known as Burma. A semi-civilian government is in charge after 49 years of military rule.
The government is still watching us, and no decision has come from them yet. I think they want to cut us off and stop other students from joining us. We think they're trying to separate us from outside communication.
Even after the arrests and skirmishes, campaigners say they'll continue their protest until their demands are met. Banu Bhatnagar, Al Jazeera.
An airliner has slid off the runway and hit a fence after landing in snowy conditions in New York. All 132 passengers and crew escaped the Delta Airlines jet without serious injury at LaGuardia Airport. Sunday is the first anniversary of one of the world's biggest aviation mystery. What happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 and its 239 passengers and crew? Well, many on board were Chinese, and their families are refusing to accept what they've been told about the jet's disappearance. Our China correspondent Adrian Brown reports.
1 year on, they still demand answers. Families of the missing trying to march on Malaysia's Beijing embassy. As always, their way is blocked. The police regard them as troublemakers and keep them under surveillance. What you're doing is illegal, he shouts. In many cases, parents lost the only child the law allows them to have.
And have still not been answered.
Such displays of emotion are frowned upon by the authorities.
With bureaus spanning 6 continents across the globe. Al Jazeera's correspondents live and breathe.
I've got the footage.
Al Jazeera.
The seat of aliens, exploring the conflicts and their struggle for acceptance. Once upon a time in Punchbowl, at this time on Al Jazeera.
And the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has been released from prison after spending 15 days in custody. Navalny was arrested for promoting a protest rally after the murder. Let's get more on its leaders are reportedly considering cutting their ties with Al-Qaeda, so they're branding the group UN Security as a terrorist. Gulf states have been meeting with Nusra Front's leader to try and persuade him to abandon Al-Qaeda. Is this something Nusra Front were actively considering?
It's very hard to actually determine why was such a high-level meeting held in Idlib by the top leaders and the second tier as well. Possibly to be considering something like that, but we're not sure. The reports are conflicting, and it's very hard to get to exactly why they were there. Especially that Ahrar al-Sham, the other large organization that was fighting against the regime, had their event Idlib in Ram Hamdan village, not so far from where the attack happened. Gets that kind of the top leader was not killed, Abu Muhammad Julani apparently, but there are some reports about him being injured, but it lost its top military commander.
Abu Hamam al-Shami, and we're told that al-Shami was vehemently opposed to the Nusra Front abandoning its ties with Al-Qaeda. Is al-Nusra whether to stay with Al-Qaeda?
Again, it's very hard to determine at the moment. There are conflicting reports. The factionalism existed when IS declared its that it is ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Sham. About 1/3 to half of the Nusra Front commanders, headquarters, many of the recruits, joined ISIS. So there was a major split back then. But then things consolidated a bit around the Syrian leadership, around Julani's leadership, especially in the south in places like Daraa, and they more or less stopped the expansion of ISIS into the northwest of Syria and the south of Syria. So the factionalism could happen on whether they could cut ties with Al-Qaeda. Abu Hammam certainly was very close to Al-Qaeda's leadership, the generation that saw Osama bin Laden, the generation that was trained by his years to Afghanistan, and after that
Abu al-Gulani is clearly thinking, well, if I do ditch al-Qaeda, we could get more resources, we could get more funding from countries like Qatar, which have made it clear that this may be a possible option, and they could always do with more funding.
Actually, it's not. We have something like that about the inclusion of
So you think the Western perception of al-Nusra Front would change if they drop their links to al-Qaeda?
It's not that straightforward. It's always more complex. You have groups that dropped their affiliation with al-Qaeda a long time ago, since the 90s, but it took that way. However, if you have vacant militants on the ground, you need to...
Injured dozens more. Activists in the city of Aleppo say government helicopters attacked a rebel-held area on Friday. The UN Special Envoy to Syria
the city for 6 weeks so there could be a trial ceasefire in one neighbourhood. He gave the Security Council a clear timeline. But now, at a think tank in London with his plans stalled, he says violence has been increasing.
And that is the tragic, the collateral effect of a very good medicine in theory. So I'm afraid you're right. We have seen an intensification around Aleppo, for instance.
He even seemed to hint that his choice of Aleppo for the freeze may have been wrong.
Aleppo perhaps was not ripe, but for the reasons I said, there is a moment when you have to also to stimulate, iconize, push in a certain direction, and therefore perhaps making it ripe.
So if Mastura's plan is failing, what else is there? The Prime Minister of Turkey, a country whose border is less than 100 kilometres from Aleppo, has been discussing the situation with the UN Secretary-General, Ban Ki-moon.
If his plan is failing, what is the plan B?
Unfortunately, the international community didn't have a plan A until now. Forget plan B. We had some proposals, but UN Security Council and international community didn't have a clear strategy regarding Syrian crisis, didn't have a clear response and reaction to war crimes committed by the regime when regime has used chemical weapons against civilians.
Here at UN headquarters, there's increasing concern about the prospects for Mr. de Mastura's plan. The French ambassador, currently the president of the Security Council, talk about a top-down rather than his approach.
By fighters. In South Africa, there's fears that power, the supply, the impact on businesses.
South Africa's power stations are old and can no longer cope with demand. New ones are being built, but it'll be some time before they're online. Eskom, the state-owned energy company, has warned people and industry they'll have to endure regular power outages.
Well, all of us are worried, and we have given them our word that we are working on restoring the stability of the power system, but it's going to be a long and painful process, I'm afraid.
South Africa, that reasonable cost is set to rise in April by 13%. Eskom has justified the hike by saying it still has some of the world's cheapest energy. But for owners of South Africa's energy-hungry industries like mines and factories, that cheap power is only useful if it's switched on. Eskom says it's given big business fair warning and asked them to cut down on their electricity needs or even generate their own. Companies like BMW have taken Eskom's advice over the consumption by 28% in plants. And Sasol, a company oil, more
equipment from steam stations to power plants.
But asking in
I do acknowledge that.
South Africa's growth slumped to just 1.5% last year, which means it's already lagging well behind other countries on the continent. It's too early to tell whether this will have a massive impact on international investment, but in a country that already suffers from regular labour strikes,
can't afford to buy generators.
Absolutely. They affect householders. They're also affecting small business entrepreneurs and anybody who's really trying to lift themselves out of poverty, because they affect transport networks. affect communication networks, and of course also send up the prices of things like fuel, of things like food and basic goods, when we have widespread so-called load shedding here. And that then inevitably impacts on the quality of life of the poorest of the poor in our society.
So why hasn't this issue been resolved yet?
Because of a blatant lack of attention to the need for better power generation, for improved power generation, and the maintenance of existing power generation capacity. And this dates back as far as the late 1990s. In fact, you know, in the decade between 1997 and about 2007, there was a survey done by one of the non-government affiliated unions, which showed that South Africa was actually decreasing supply to sectors such as mining and industry, but that, of course, there was an increased supply to those households that had previously not had electricity under apartheid, but were now joining the power grid. But also, interestingly, that South Africa was also increasing its sale of electricity outside its borders. We provided firm contracts to countries, Mozambique, in the neighborhood. So-called
has said that, look, we're refurbishing old stations, we're bringing new power stations online. But it sounds like that's going to take a long time. And in the meantime, energy prices are due to rise, aren't they?
Absolutely. 13% is a huge increase in energy prices for the average South African, let alone for the business person or the small business owner or the entrepreneur. So in the budget speech last week, down to 2%. Economic forecast for next year down as
Nigeria's president says his troops are narrowing down the areas controlled by Boko Haram. Goodluck Jonathan's also said the army's closer to finding the schoolgirls abducted by the army.
Secure schools. A Nigerian government delegation traveling to Chibok. It's been cleared of Boko Haram fighters, but still trying to come to terms with the abduction of its schoolgirls last year. And this is how. A project supported by international donors like Britain, United States, Qatar and others. The idea is simple. Go into areas that have been freed from Boko Haram control and build new, safe schools. It's a new part of the strategy against a group with a name that basically means Western education is sinful. Not only places like this have new schools, students from places where Boko Haram is still in control are being relocated so they can attend class 2. More than 2,400 so far.
Until finding ways. We are looking at software and hardware.
Bolstered by the recent successes over Boko Haram, the Nigerian military is confident that schools like this will reopen soon.
We've been implementing one thing right behind me there, and we've now Boko Haram.
For students in areas affected by violence. But almost 11 months after 276 students were taken by Boko Haram from this school, 219 of them are yet to come home, something this community hasn't forgotten.
I really don't know what to say. I don't know what's happening to her. She was taken when she was recuperating from a surgical operation. I just want her back safe. The idea of rebuilding the school is okay, but I just want my baby back.
Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Chibok, northeast Nigeria.
Trust in Spain's local politicians is at an all-time low after a series of corruption scandals. Close to 2,000 are currently under investigation. Now, one neighbourhood group is trying to restore confidence in the system by changing the way towns are run. From just outside the capital, Madrid,
revolution. 4 years ago, a group of residents fed up with the incumbent council decided to take matters into their own hands and formed a local party. Their priorities were to make local politics accountable and to get rid of the town's debt. They won, beating the ruling Popular whole began to make their reduced.
We don't have a political motto. It's just like our only idea is to manage the city as if it were
bitterly divided between left-wing and right-wing politics, that there emerges an alternative built on finding a pragmatic solution. The neighbours managed to the mainstream political parties, but it's even had newcomers.
Corruption are at the top of the list of worries. No less than 800 cases of political corruption have been uncovered since the year 2000. Regional politics has played a hefty part. 676 local councils have been found to be misusing public funds. The worst offenders, the regions of Andalusia, Valencia and Galicia. And it goes across political parties. More and more voters are looking at this year. Neighbours of Torre is that able,
including a blow for Sepp Blatter in his bid for a fifth term as FIFA president. All the details coming up. Welcome back. Let's get all the sport now. Here's Richard.
Thanks a lot, Shuli. We're going to start with the latest from the Cricket World Cup. Champions India are taking on the West Indies in Pool B. The West Indies won the toss in Perth and they chose to bat. They're probably regretting that decision now, having been bowled out for just 182. Mohammad Shami taking 3 wickets. India are looking to make it 4-3. It comes just a week after he was cut at the Honda Classic. The English Football Association has called upon fans to report sexist abuse at games. It comes after 2 recent incidents involving Chelsea doctor Eva Carneiro and assistant referee Helen Byrne. So far this season, 25 incidents of sexist abuse have been reported to anti-discrimination group Kick It Out and the equality group Women in Football. Last season, just 2 incidents were reported. Michael Van Praag, federation known as CONMEBOL, current Sepp Blatter term.
Was transparency and change. That is also what the feeling that I got that they want change. I have a good feeling about my meetings yesterday. That's all that I can say. And of course, they didn't disclose what they're going to do.
Bayern Munich in the Champions League 13 on April the 8th, freeing players to represent themselves, as well as a rise in the minimum wage.
I know nothing about it for the most part. It's none of my business, to be honest with you. Whatever they agreed to, they agreed to, and if everyone's happy at that end, I'm good with it.
Number 2, Thunder, 1 to 105. That's despite points from 94-75 was the final score. It's Portland's 5th. In the reigning champions, the Stanley Cup winner, Schlemko got the winning goal. Final score, 4-3 to the Flames. Now, Almaty's bid team for the 2022 Winter Olympics have announced a series of changes which they say will save $500 million. The International Olympic Committee has urged bidding cities to be financially efficient. The biggest change will be the elimination of 2 planned venues and the relocation of other events in the Kazakhstan.
Missing from the face of the earth who've been killed by their parents at birth.
We're not going to have any sustainable peace while women remain absent.
Join the conversation, the stream, and this time on Al Jazeera.
A year has passed since a plane full of people flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing went missing. Al Jazeera takes a look at one of the world's greatest aviation mysteries through the eyes of the families involved. Malaysia flight MH370, 1 year on.
Local union to state totalitarianism. Al Jazeera World charts the power play that has dominated modern-day Syria, examining the rise of the Ba'ath Party and the ascendancy of the Al-Assad dynasty. What are the historic roots of Syria's ongoing civil war? Al Jazeera World, at this time.
As a picture editor, my role is like a storyteller. Al Jazeera has a very powerful visual content, was able to communicate with its audience in a far more engaging way.
It's local people telling their stories the way they know how. The people that you see on television working on these stories live these stories.
Working for Al Jazeera, I get to be involved in the production of the story. I'm constantly impressed by the energy and enthusiasm that my colleagues bring to their jobs, and it's a pleasure to work with them.
Hello, I'm Martine Dennis, live from Doha. Also coming up in the next half an hour. Peace talks begin, but not with each other. Libya's feuding factions refuse to meet face to face. A Russian dissident is released from prison after serving a 15-day sentence for promoting a protest rally. And hanging by a thread, the dramatic helicopter rescue of 200 skiers from a broken Italian cable car. But first, a senior commander of the Al-Qaeda-linked rebel group Nusra Front has been killed in Syria in a government in the city of Idlib on Thursday. Initially, the Nusra army was killed. This update from Beirut.
Senior commanders of al-Nusra Front killed, definitely a major blow, a powerful hit. And it comes at a critical time, at a time what we understand that the Nusra group has been coming under some sort of pressure from many channels, including international channels, to change course. They want al-Nusra to disassociate itself from al-Qaeda, which in turn will allow it to receive weapons and funding. We have to remember al-Nusra is al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. It's on the U.S. list of terrorist organizations and sanctioned by the UN. So there is pressure al-Nusra to become a purely Syrian organization, but we understand there are splits. The men who were killed, those commanders, are believed to be the hardliners, the extremists in the organization, those who do not want to split from al-Qaeda. So this is undoubtedly weakening the organization, these divisions. This is one of the most powerful players on the ground. In fact, it's the main rival of the Syrian government on the ground. But we're going to have to see how this plays out in the next few days, if these divisions become even deeper. But Nusra really, over recent days, was sending a message to the West. It declared war on a U.S. ally, a Syrian moderate group known as Hazm movement. That movement was forced to disband. It was receiving weapons from the U.S. So Nusra's message to the West was, we are the force on the ground. We can eliminate anyone we want on the ground. But we're going to have to wait to see whether or not this group will succumb to the pressures from the outside.
Now, fighters from the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant have started destroying another of Iraq's most important archaeological sites. The ancient Assyrian city of Nimrud lies on the Tigris River and dates back more than 3,000 years. The government says bulldozers were used on the antiquities during the assault. This latest destruction of Iraq's heritage follows the release of an ISIL video last week that showed artifacts in Mosul's museum being smashed by fighters. Now, Israeli police are saying a Palestinian car driver has been shot and injured after his vehicle ploughed into pedestrians in occupied East Jerusalem. 4 of the 5 who were hurt are Israeli policewomen. The incident happened outside a police station on the border which divides East and West Jerusalem. Libya's UN-recognized parliament in Tobruk says airstrikes will end for 3 days in an attempt to promote peace talks. The meeting in end the political fight for control of Libya's
about a way out of the conflict. This is the go-between. United Nations representative Bernardino Leon is meeting here with members of the Tripoli-based government, recognized as legitimate by the country's constitutional court.
We came here because there is a crisis in Libya. The others don't want to talk to us. They want chaos to give talks to succeed.
they have been fighting each other for control.
The fact that we are here means we are building trust, which hasn't been the case in the past. All the parties want to solve the problem, implement a ceasefire, form a national unity government and appoint a new prime minister.
Rival factions in the past brushed aside calls for dialogue, each laying its claim as the legitimate authority in Libya.
So far I can tell you that there is a sense of, if not optimism, at least a sense that it is possible to make a deal. And this is something very important because in the last months this was not the case.
For years, violence in the country has claimed the lives of thousands of people and forced many others to flee for safety. It has also played into the hands of groups claiming allegiance to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, raising concerns Libya's civil war could destabilize the whole region.
The international community has made it clear that it won't opt for a military option in Libya and that it's up to the bitterly divided governments in Tobruk and Tripoli to settle their differences and agree on a roadmap to end the civil war. Hashim Al-Barra, Al Jazeera, Rabat.
Now, peace talks between the two warring parties in South Sudan have been postponed indefinitely. President Salva Kiir and his rival, the rebel leader and former Vice President Riek Machar, have been meeting in Ethiopia since Tuesday, but they've failed to meet a second deadline on Thursday, which was aimed at ending the fighting. Now, the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has been released from 15 days in prison. He was arrested for promoting a rally where the opposition was.
My opinion on this, and I won't add anything more for now. But I'd like to say that our activity will not change in any way. We will not lessen our efforts, we will not change anything. And in this sense, the act of terror that took place will not achieve its aims. I'm sure that it will not frighten anyone. It's not frightened me, and it has not frightened my comrades.
Let's hear more now from our correspondent in Moscow, Rory Challens.
Alexei Navalny was murdered as a result of the political leadership of the country, and Putin of that order. Next for the war, or maybe he is a more obvious target for assassination. Ksenia Sobchak, another opposition figure, was warned at Boris Nemtsov's funeral that she might be next. But their work goes on. The report that Nemtsov was working on war and invasion military's involvement in the conflict in Ukraine will still and make any kind of significant headway, the opposition is going to have to overcome the prevailing mood in Russia at the moment, which is one of fairly strident conservative nationalism, and that's going to be very difficult indeed.
Now, an opposition leader from Tajikistan has been shot dead whilst in Turkey. Umarali Kuvatov was killed by an unknown assailant in Istanbul. The oil businessman led the banned opposition organisation Group 24. He was one of the president's most outspoken critics. Police and said he was protesting against annual US-South Korea military exercises, which began earlier this week. In northeastern India, a lynch mob has broken into a high-security prison and murdered a rape suspect. The 35-year-old was dragged from the prison, paraded naked and beaten to death. Syed Farid Khan was accused of raping a 20-year-old woman last month in Nagaland. Student leaders in Myanmar are accusing government leaders of trying again to curb academic freedom. Now, protests that will be peaceful have turned violent. Banu Bhatnagar reports.
Student protesters say this was a heavy-handed crackdown on a peaceful protest. Police say they came under attack.
Security men in plain clothes a girl in Pyongyang.
Would stifle academic freedom. They're calling for changes to the school system and the right to form unions. These demonstrations have gone on for months in Let Padan. Authorities say it's the first time they've taken action, despite the fact that activists did not get the proper permissions. Student activists want to march to Myanmar's largest city, Yangon.
We want reform education system, neglected for something like years, but with
civilian charge.
I think they want to cut us off and stop other students from joining us. We think they're trying to separate us from outside communication.
Even after the arrests and skirmishes, campaigners say they'll continue their protest until their demands are met. Banu Bhatnagar, Al Jazeera.
We've got a lot more to come here at Al Jazeera, including on patrol with the new police force in southern Yemen.
Well, the finally heads to the violent southwest of the country.
Hello again. We should be able to forecast 2 more days of winter still, but without any snow falling from the sky. This is for Japan, but actually not alone. And even the cloud that was bringing rain to the south is drifting offshore, so you're between systems, if you like. The result of that is double-figure temperatures for most of Honshu, the odd shower coming onshore. Tokyo could be a recipient. Sapporo's above freezing. Occasional shower here maybe, but the main snow, of course, is a long way away on the mainland. Even Vladivostok's enjoying +4. That, of course, is just one day. We've got an equal southerly breeze, so warmer weather for China. Hong Kong's weather for the last day or so has been overcast, drizzle in and out and quite humid. I can see no reason why that should change. And the wind follows you across the southeast corner of China to Taiwan. Quite a few showers here. There's been a lot of rain actually on the island, it being mountainous, but the air's coming off the mainland, so visibility's also been dropping. Again, it won't in the next 24 hours. Back to India, I've seen a few showers build on the Deccan Plateau, dotted around. It's a little bit early in the year for it, but once more we've got a fair amount of cloud in the north of Pakistan, the far north of India, bringing rain and more snow to the Hindu Kush.
And for every story, different points of view. We can through analysis and debate with people who matter. Martin, all roads seem to be leading to the conflict in Ukraine. Why? Understanding how events shape and impact our lives. We look at the bigger picture. We get the inside story. At this time on Al Jazeera. Hello again. Let's have a look at the top stories then here at Al Jazeera. A senior commander of the Al-Qaeda-linked rebel group Nusra Front has been killed in Syria. Al-Shami died in a government airstrike in the city of Idlib on Thursday. Israeli police say a Palestinian man has been shot and injured after he ploughed his car into pedestrians in occupied East Jerusalem. 4 of the 5 who were hurt are Israeli border policewomen. 5 people have been injured. A Russian dissident has been released after spending 15 days in custody in Moscow. Alexei Navalny was arrested for promoting a rally where Kremlin critic Boris Nemtsov was due to speak before he was murdered. Now, the family of an Argentinian prosecutor says independent forensic tests show he was murdered. Alberto Nisman was found dead in his home in January, just hours before he was due to testify in Congress against the president. An official autopsy pointed to suicide. Our Latin America editor Lucia Newman reports.
The results from an independent forensic team seem to confirm what almost everyone in Argentina already suspected, that prosecutor Alberto Nisman did not die by his own hand.
I want to let you know that Nisman did not have an accident. Nisman did not commit suicide. Nisman was killed, and his death is an assassination of unknown proportions that deserves answers and, in my opinion, on the part of the institutions of the Republic.
Alberto Nisman was found dead in his apartment from a gunshot wound to his head. State forensic studies found no gunpowder on his hands, but refused to rule out suicide. Nisman died the night before he was to deliver a report to Congress. President Cristina Kirchner and her foreign minister had conspired to cover up Iran's alleged involvement in the 1994 bombing of a Jewish cultural center. Nisman's former wife, who hired the independent forensic team, says the results also indicate that the prosecutor did not die instantly and may have suffered. His death continues to cast doubts on the president, who staunchly denies any involvement and suggests Nisman was murdered by rogue members of Argentina's intelligence service who wanted to implicate her. Conspiracy theories enough for several Hollywood thrillers. But while there now seems to be little doubt that Nisman did not commit suicide, there is still no hard evidence pointing the finger at who might have pulled the trigger. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera.
Now, he was one of the most wanted men in Mexico, and a week ago, the drug lord Servando Gomez, also known as Natuta, was arrested by the security forces. Now, he headed the notorious Knights Templar cartel, which terrorized the southwestern state of Michoacán with a campaign of kidnapping and extortion. But his arrest has now revived hopes that life could improve, as John Holman reports from one of the gang's former strongholds.
Lime's a big business in Michoacan state, southwest Mexico. Not just for producers, but also the Knights Templar cartel, who spent years offering them and other local businesses a simple choice: pay up or face death. But no more.
The extortion was systematic. You had to pay the cartel as if it was a tax, but now that's gone.
Last Friday's capture of Servando Gomez, the Knights Templar leader and Mexico's most wanted man, was the culmination of a year-long operation in which federal forces flooded the state.
Today we find a Michoacán which is reactivating its economy, which has taken back its public spaces and increased tourism, a place for investment once again.
Tell that to jeweler Ricardo Manso. His brother Ruben was stabbed to death on the sidewalk 3 days ago.
Honestamente está mintiendo, porque la delincuencia no ha bajado.
Honestly, the Interior Minister is lying because crime hasn't gone down. Every day we have assaults, robberies. The police aren't controlling the situation, they just ride around, that's all they do.
Federal forces and citizen vigilante groups have seriously weakened the Knights Templar cartel.